Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we are taking a look at the Almirante Irizar. This is a brand new Pan-American light cruiser. Emphasis on light cruiser here, as the gimmick is secondaries. How does that even work? We've always seen secondary brawlers as battleships or heavy cruisers. Lots of armor, allowing them to play at closer ranges. What does it look like to give a light cruiser some amazing secondaries? A lot of that secondary power, by the way, is built into this F key, allowing us to focus on our main guns with the commander build and module upgrades and still have a lot of this secondary firepower. And I think that is the best way to play this ship. I will go into full secondary builds, don't you worry. I had to try it out at least a few times. But this ship really is a light cruiser with a special secondary gimmick that is a nice to have, not the primary mode of operation with it. We have 25 millimeters of armor bow and stern, so this is not as weak as a Minotaur, for example, or a Brisbane, but still we get overmatched by basically all of the battleships at our tier. It's a very large and exposed citadel, so trying to brawl and forcing brawling, especially in 2026 World of Warships at tier 10, is going to be rather difficult. It's a nice to have, it's not necessarily something that we want to force in every game. Fortunately, the main guns here are actually pretty good. Check out that range. 17.8 kilometers of maximum range is absolutely wild for a light cruiser, and that is usable maximum range too, as the shell velocity here is pretty solid. It's even a little bit better than something like a Brisbane. It's a little closer to, say, San Martin guns. Relatively comfortable, not the easiest to lead at range, but against battleships, you should be fine. The HE here is quite similar to the Brisbane as well. DPM-wise, we're basically the same. 258,000 HE DPM on Irizar. Brisbane also has 258,000 HE DPM. We have a similar amount of pen at 30 millimeters, same fire chance at 9%. So if you're used to Brisbane guns, you can think of this as a bit of a, in the HE at least, Brisbane with a smoke without the radar, which is kind of interesting, especially considering this gimmick. So I need to talk to you about this F key, as you're about to see maybe the best case scenario. Shikishima has a very weak upper belt. Notice we're on 79,000 damage right now as we pop this F key. It gives us a ton of bonuses to our secondaries, but crucially, it also buffs our main gun alpha damage. Look at some of these salvos out of the main guns. I think that was a 13k salvo. That was the light cruiser, by the way. Check the reload. We're getting like a 4 or 5 second reload right now. Yes, we go from 80,000 damage done all the way up to around 140,000 by the time this Shikishima is taken down. That alpha damage buff of 45% is only applying to the armor piercing, so it doesn't buff the HE. So you really want to time this for when you get a good opportunity with the AP. It's not helping you on HE farming at all. It also, of course, buffs those secondaries, which do supplemental damage. That is not the main damage output of this ship. Even though these secondaries are basically little druid guns, they massively buffed them in testing to give them 0.005 second fuse times. So that means if they pen, they basically don't overpen. They also gave it 12 millimeter fuse thresholds. So any little bit of armor is enough to fuse them and then detonate them. So assuming they get through the armor, it functions a lot more like sap. Except it's sap that can also citadel, because the pen is actually monstrous. Unfortunately, I can't show you that on a Hawaii, but against light cruisers, and yes, even into battleships, it is possible to citadel with these secondaries. Absolutely ridiculous. At 1 kilometer, we have 267 mil pen on these essentially druid AP shells. And this F key buffs that pen by double, by a full 100%. So at 1 kilometer, we have 534 mil pen. That's enough for battleships. Now, we were able to get that close to a Hawaii because he doesn't overmatch us. The thing we have to consider here, and the reason I can't really show you this in random battles, is that the battleship is going to be shooting at that light cruiser at 1 kilometer and easily overmatching through and hitting our gigantic citadel. So while yes, in theory, you can smash Yamatos and plenty of other battleships, citadeling them to death with those secondaries, which is absolutely hilarious. Getting that scenario is going to be rather tricky. I would view this more as a way to deal with those cruisers that give you broadside at medium ranges, not necessarily the full YOLO rush on a battleship. This wants to play that light cruiser role. We have great detection at 9.6 kilometers, allowing us to sneak around the map and not always be spotted. We have that amazing smokescreen allowing us to farm very nicely at these closer ranges. That also allows us to use the secondaries as well out of that smokescreen. And this here was definitely one of my better games in the ship, getting the full Kraken and a decent amount out of those secondaries. But still, it's a primarily on the main guns is where this ship is going to shine. That game, I wasn't even running the full build for secondaries for their range. So with the F key giving us special dispersion upgrades there, plus 32%, as well as that alpha damage and pen, it's getting us out to 11 kilometers when we take accuracy mod on our main guns. And I must say, I did notice when I was running full secondary builds, or even just the range mod to get out to the full 12.6 like we are running here, I noticed the main guns were not quite as accurate as I was hoping, especially because I'm shooting a lot of armor piercing out of these main guns. And with AP, especially AP that's this weak, I want to say, yes, the alpha damage goes crazy into this Vermont and certainly into that Shikushima in the previous match. But it's worth considering that these AP shells are basically the same as Yodo. Pretty similar alpha damage, but crucially, in the pen, ricochet angles, fuse thresholds, fusing times, it doesn't have that much pen. It's only got at 10 kilometers, 110 millimeters of pen. So even using our F key here for improved alpha damage, we get the full pens for like nearly 10,000 on the Yoshino, but we're not able to citadel him, right? It's not giving us that bonus that maybe would have been pretty nice, although perhaps that goes a little bit overpowered territory. We also are going to notice that as I'm spamming AP here, I probably should have swapped to the HE, but I want you to realize this. I was testing. I wanted to see how the AP would perform into some of these more angled ships, because again, it's a massive bonus while we have this F key up. Didn't perform very well. Swap to the HE when the target is angled because it's normal 45 to 60 degree pen angles. We do not have that amazing 60 to 75 degree pen angle like the secondaries have. Those are AP only though. You want to swap over to that HE when the target is angled. When they're broadside, the AP does great, especially when that F key is going. The HE, surprisingly good. I found it surprisingly reliable on lighting fires. So that's another tactic you can use is light a fire or two and then swap over to that AP. Maybe farm up your F key if you're playing an Irizar with the HE, get your fires going, and then once the F key is available, that's when you swap over to the armor piercing and get that nice bonus. When we're using the normal ship without the F key, we actually only get 9.5 kilometer range on these secondaries. And I think that is kind of convenient, actually. When you fire secondaries, it actually blooms your detection. So as a very light cruiser, if we accidentally were shooting our secondaries outside of our concealment range, I think a lot of people would get caught off guard. Notice here, I am undetected until I use my F key. The secondaries start firing. We then fire our main guns too, and we are spotted. I think that might have added a little element of skill in keeping your secondaries off and then enabling them. But for the average player, it's already going to be difficult enough to play a light cruiser focused on brawling, okay? Not needing to worry about that, where the secondaries are accidentally going to get you spotted, is certainly a nice thing to have. That angled performance, surprisingly good on those secondaries into the Vermont here. Our main guns weren't doing a whole lot, but those little ticks of damage, very nice out of the secondaries. And if you were wondering how I was pushing an open water flank without taking damage, well, I was getting pretty lucky. Vermont takes one look at us, and there goes half that HP. But there you go, 40k to alpha damage off of only 100 secondary hits. The secondaries are very good here when we get them in that right scenario. What about Irizar versus Irizar? Pretty spooky if you get caught broadside to one of these, especially with those secondaries flying around. Their pen with that F key up is absolutely ridiculous. Consider it's also druid pen angles and fuse thresholds, 5 kilometers here, and with the F key, we have 370 millimeters of pen. If we're at 10 kilometers, we still, with the F key up on the secondaries, have 242 millimeters of pen. If you're a cruiser, light cruiser, even heavy cruiser, you have to respect this armor piercing on the secondaries when the F key is activated. It still has decent pen when the F key isn't activated, and it is, by the way, Napoli accuracy on these secondaries. So they are quite accurate, allowing you to get a decent amount of damage out of them, even without using the F key to get the extra range and alpha damage, that sort of thing. What if now, after fighting an Irizar, we're on low HP and having to deal with a Des Moines at close range with Castilla backing him up? Well, this is where it's very nice to have that HE. When enemy ships angle to you, our main gun AP is not going to do a whole lot. So this HE helps us out a ton for that supplemental damage. And now we get to see what a super heal combined with Minotaur level maneuverability can do. It allows us to dodge a lot of this incoming fire and heal back through a lot of the damage that we are definitely taking here. It's not the fastest ship, but having the built-in acceleration like we find on Minotaur and Brisbane means it takes forever to slow down in smoke, admittedly. That is certainly a downside. But it also means that we accelerate quickly. We drift around corners, and that can be tricky to shoot at if you are constantly maneuvering around, trying to maneuver around shells at these closer ranges. We still go down, but hey, we managed to trade out that Des Moines. Now then, I've been pretty positive about this ship so far because I do think it's a cool gimmick. I do think it is an interesting, different playstyle. The problem is, this ship is very expensive and, well, it's not very good in a brawl, guys. It is very, very squishy. So if we get caught against Napoli with a battleship pushing us around a corner, we're in some trouble, okay? In this case, I wish desperately that I had the improved pen angles on the armor piercing. And more specifically, I actually wish I had torpedoes here instead of the secondary gimmick. I think the ship would probably be better in a lot of these push up to an island to farm on, and then when the enemy battleship tries to YOLO rush you around the corner, you got the torps to deal with them. It would have been nice to have the improved pan angles on that AP against the Napoli with our F key up, but look at this with the Slava. Technically, at these ranges, we could citadel him if our F key is up and the secondaries fire. The secondaries won't be firing over or around islands. You kind of need open water for the secondaries to actually shoot. But here, look at him push around the corner. It's the freest kill on a Slava if I have any sort of torpedo power. And oftentimes, this is what I am wanting out of my light cruisers that push up to islands, right? We apply a lot of pressure to the cap, we help destroyers, and then when that battleship tries to take us out, we have the torps to deal with them when he pushes around the corner. In this case, we didn't have that. And yes, I can play around that. I should definitely be able to play around that. But situationally, I think it's much more powerful to have torpedoes than these secondaries. They are pretty solid. They're not bad secondaries at all. But when I'm playing a light cruiser role, personally, I think it would be a lot more impactful to have the Brisbane toolkit with the radar and the torpedoes than the Irizar toolkit where we have the smoke and not the torpedoes. I suppose the secondaries. It does count as quite a bit of damage, especially when we get both sides firing. That's pretty cool. Still playing with fire with the Montana volleys. Remember that we do have a very large above water citadel, stepped citadel, so it's not really able to be angled at these ranges. We're just getting very fortunate that we can drift around their shells. Another reason that I've been somewhat positive about this ship, even though it's not my favorite so far, is that I admittedly was trying to force the secondary playstyle. Right, this is the gimmick of the ship. And for the first video, I need to take a look at it, trying to see what these secondaries are capable of. I think if you are going to play this ship as that light cruiser role, with this secondaries as a supplemental damage output and not trying to full send the enemy team like I've been doing in the vast majority of these games, you're probably going to have a better time. Broadside Minotaur, 10 kilometers. I think we have the pen, but look at that dispersion. We're actually going to miss the citadel there, and our teammate will take him out. So we didn't get a chance to get the follow-up there. But when we're running full secondary build, we are missing out on some accuracy, notably. I did feel that from time to time. Okay, I got caught up talking about the ship and the playstyle again. We need to talk about the cost of this ship. You've probably already seen at this point, considering the ship is out and available to purchase. But 40,000 doubloons for this ship as well as 160 US dollars in the premium shop, is extremely expensive for a light cruiser that wants to brawl. That is a very, very steep cost. I think I would be much more positive or recommending you try to get this ship maybe if it was something you could earn. Perhaps it was a coal tier 10 ship. It would be very interesting. Not for everyone, but certainly it would be an interesting playstyle. Definitely a challenge ship to play. But for that much money, unfortunately, it does impact my commentary here, and it is simply not worth it. I think there are plenty of better ships that are light cruisers in the game already, just in the tech tree already. I think there are plenty of better secondary brawling ships also in the tech tree, completely for free. And this combination, well, interesting to take a look at, undeniably. Very, very curious to see a light cruiser with this secondary firepower. I don't actually think it's that good. I think it's very, very situational. And for the most part, a bit of an anti-synergy. I mentioned that at the beginning, but I do think that overall, trying to get into secondary brawling range, trying to force that playstyle while playing a light cruiser is not going to be to the ship's best ability. I think for the most part, it's going to result in you getting caught too aggressive with very little armor and losing your ship early, when otherwise you could have used the pretty solid main guns. It's not the best DPM at tier 10, but it's solid. It's got decent shell velocity and, most importantly, amazing range. This ship allows you to farm from very long distances, which is kind of the meta at tier 10, assuming you don't forget completely about the secondaries, but assuming you don't force the secondaries, using them as supplemental, secondary damage, right? I wanted to see them, I wanted to push, I wanted to run full secondary builds. It just simply did not work out as well for me. Speaking of, another reason pushing in is maybe not the best idea in a light cruiser is plane spotting. The AA here, not all that impressive. Been trying out that new AA talent, the change to defensive AA. It didn't seem very impressive on this ship, I will say, but I want to try it some more with some actually powerful AA ships. What if we play around an island like this one? Pretty standard playstyle, farming over an island. We get our F key, and it does allow the secondaries to maybe shoot at the Yamato. They would arc over this island, but notice they're not shooting until we get direct line of sight. That's an awkward part about the secondaries as well. We're playing a light cruiser. We farm over islands. We use island cover to prevent the battleships from spotting us and from getting damage into us. But that means the secondaries won't fire because they're not really able to fire over islands. The computer-controlled ones decide to not shoot, even though the shell velocity and shell arcs would allow them to. I also included that clip there. I wanted to note on the Willem that at medium and longer ranges, even though the Willem was fairly broadside, the AP was bouncing and shattering a lot, even with the F key up. So again, not the best angled performance, not the best long range performance, though when we time our push, excuse the secondaries being off, I had my AA off because the Afondator was using his ASWs to try and find us if our AA was active, so I wanted to stay dark, not let him know that I was forming this flank because it allowed us to take him out and clutch out this win here. The AP does very good at these medium and closer ranges into some battleship upper belts, and especially into light cruisers, but otherwise it's a medium to long range HE farmer from a smokescreen. And that's fine. In fact, that's more than fine. That's a very, very solid ship at tier 10. The amount of damage you can apply with the main guns from relative safety, you don't need to be pushed up this far, and by the way, that's not an overmatch sit because the Togasa does not overmatch our armor. That's because of the little step on the back there allowed him to pen our stern section, and then the Citadel is so raised in the middle that yes, he was actually able to pen through and Citadel is there. But if we instead play a little smarter, medium range, smoke up instead of trying to tank the battleship, suddenly the ship looks a whole lot better. And the secondaries are just there as an accessory, right? And I think that is totally fine. I think it's a solid enough ship, but not one that I would think spending 40,000 doubloons on. Certainly not. Well, we have Holiday Convoy coming through here where you can earn completely for free or by spending a lot of in-game resources as well to get a really interesting premium like Bismarck 41, or maybe you're interested in New Jersey. There's so many ships. I'll be going over that event very, very soon. Some recommendations I have for you guys, what to save for, what maybe isn't as worth it, at least as far as we know, considering there's some unannounced or unseen test ships also teased in that event. But for now, Irizar is a pretty interesting, curious playstyle that is something I would have never dreamed up. I would have never thought to put a secondary brawling playstyle onto a light cruiser. Perhaps it's a little bit like what I see John the Ruthless do in his Colbert, except it's not necessarily all about the main guns here. It's more about secondaries doing quite a bit of damage too. This ship is not quite as maneuverable as that, and that is a very, very hard playstyle to accomplish. Though fortunately, if we can set up in the right spots with our smoke screen, hopefully not drifting into our smoke here in front of everyone. Luckily, they were not looking at us. Then we can use our F key from relative safety in our smoke, assuming there's no radars, and the damage will actually look pretty good here, I think. It's situationally pretty interesting. It's situationally pretty good even. But I do think that most of our games at tier 10 are so passive that you're really not going to get this secondary crazy gimmick going. In this one, in fact, I was running the full secondary build. I don't necessarily recommend that. We'll talk about the build later. But this was including the 6th upgrade slot and the range, of course. So trying to maximize the secondary DPM at all costs. I don't necessarily recommend that because the F key is charged off of main battery hits. Main gun hits give you 2% charge. So if we use main gun DPM, right, that 6th upgrade slot for our main gun reload, that's going to get us our F key more often, which is where most of the secondary power is hidden. It's not going to come from the 6th upgrade slot for secondaries. You want to get access to this F key much, much more often. But hey, in this one, we managed to get a Confederate. We're managing to actually take out the Tempesta here, as well as push in and brawl against a Hindenburg, a Moskva at the very end of this one. We timed our moment, and that's kind of interesting that you can have such a stealthy ship that then can use its F key to burst out its range on its secondaries out to 12.6 kilometers while having a normal 9.6 kilometer detect. You can get in range, smoke up, and then use your F key and have enough range to actually attack the enemy ships, all the while not being spotted, right? I think that's interesting that we don't have to be spotted before we activate our secondary gimmick. I think that's cool that you can sneak into secondary range and pop your smoke in that with the Irizar. It's hard to do. I found this ship very, very challenging to play. But again, I was trying to force the secondary playstyle. If you have this ship, if you're trying to play this ship, do not force it. It will happen from time to time, and enjoy it when it does. Most of your secondary power is in that F key as well, of course. So you don't need to force the playstyle. Play it as a standard light cruiser, and then when you get the opportunity, someone's within that 12.6 kilometer range, use your secondaries, and they do surprisingly good work. They're basically druid guns after all, with, assuming the F key is up, more pen and more damage. All right, sorry for rambling so long. I could talk about this ship for quite a while. I find it's just so interesting. Light cruiser with secondary gimmick. I think that is wild as a concept and interesting to play, even if I don't think it is very good. Guys, I do not think this is a very good ship. I think there are plenty of better options to play, and I really do think that the main guns and the hull are a bit anti-synergistic with the secondary gimmick. It can work, though. We can make it work. Just because we can't make it work does not mean it is good, necessarily. Lisboa pairs very well. Of course, we're playing a Pan-American ship, so Lisboa goes crazy. 175 hits with main gun or secondary, right? It's both. So when we're getting those secondaries going with their crazy fast reload, we get access to 22.5% further secondary reload and then 5% main gun reload, which then allows us to farm up F keys quicker. It's very nice. The extra speed is very useful here as we are very slow. This is with speed flag, only 33.6 knots. Build looked something like this for the most part. Trying to build for some secondaries with top grade and Pack-a-Punch, but mostly trying to help us survive with Concealment Expert. I do miss out on Survivability Expert, unfortunately, but I wanted the extra heal, the extra smoke, the extra hydro. It's mostly for the smoke and the heal, helping us stay alive, because we are a light cruiser after all. And then here running Demo Expert for extra HE pressure. We want to pressure battleships and cruisers that are angled with our HE, force them to turn broadside to try and get away, then pop our F key and smash them with the armor piercing is kind of the idea there. Not a lot of other good 2-pointers too, to be honest with you. Grease the gears as the turrets are a little bit slow, and gun feeder because we want both the HE and that armor piercing. Notice here the turning circle radius, not the best, but that's partially down to how this ship drifts around corners. Rudder shift time is just okay. 9.6 detect is very, very nice. Again, sneaking into range and then popping the F key for the secondaries. It's interesting. Upgrades looked a little something like this. I did mess around, like I said, I did mess around with auxiliary armaments, and of course, plenty of games, most of my games, in fact, were played with main battery mod 1. I even swapped out to steering gears mod 2 to get down to like a 5-second rudder to help me play that more nimble playstyle, trying to help me stay alive when I'm brawling and using the secondaries. Try to use the smokes for the secondaries. It's a lot easier than open water gunboating. I really don't like the full secondary range build. I really wanted the extra accuracy so that my F key with that AP alpha damage on our main guns was more impactful. That's what I really found addicting with this ship, was like that Shikishima clip from the very start of this video. Absolutely amazing feeling finding those opportunities, and to guarantee those hit not his belt armor, splash low, overpen superstructure, to guarantee them into the upper belt. I like that a lot, though you do miss out on the secondaries, so perhaps running this is totally fine. And again, main battery mod 3 allows us to get the combat instruction so much sooner. That is the main power behind our secondaries. So would you rather have 20% reload on your secondaries all the time, or more access to 32% range, 45% shell damage, and 100% pen on those secondaries as well, with the side bonus of another 45% alpha on your main gun AP? Yeah, that's why I would go main battery over the secondary, at least on the upgrade module there. Worth mentioning that the reason I was so late to Irizar, as the NDA lifted on Monday, and we're on Friday, I believe, when this video is coming out, is that these buffs were untested and on the ship when it was pushed to live. So I'm not so sure. I'm going to be a little critical here about Wargaming's testing purposes, right? 20 to Julio. Apology. I'm so sorry. I got that so wrong last video. 20 to Julio got also some pretty big buffs that were untested, right? Like when it's buffs as the ship goes live, Wargaming has no testing data and the ship is just released. That is so weird. We've seen that with other Pan American ships. Look at it, you Libertad. Got some pretty absurd buffs on release. I don't think these are either as oppressive as what release Libertad was. I don't think. But it helps Irizar a lot. I can't imagine playing Irizar without the super heal. It had a standard heal before. You know, they didn't test it with a super heal. I don't think this ship is busted by any means. And then giving it that British light cruiser acceleration. And then, of course, a pretty big buff to the secondary battery reload. You know, I may not be a game designer, but that's a lot of untested changes for a ship to go through. Again, I don't think this ship is unbalanced. But it is interesting to take a look at Wargaming's balance department and how they go about things. I would disagree with some things, shall we say. Now, armor. Having 25 is really nice. I've compared this ship to Brisbane a lot. I have. And legitimately, having 25 instead of 16 means that so many heavy cruisers overmatch Brisbane will not be overmatching Irizar. That's where this ship is kind of able to bow in brawl a lot of cruisers, have the crazy secondary pen angles, alpha damage, pen even. I think they have more pen than the main guns, especially with the F key going. Kind of crazy that. But you can brawl cruisers very, very well in this ship. But against battleships, yeah, you may have noticed that little step up there. That is full citadel. So you can angle, right? And in theory, you can bounce battleship shells off of this. It's 81 and 88, by the way. So sap shells just go straight through you. Colombo, Afanator, a lot of those sap shells are just going to guaranteed full pen citadel you. Pretty scary to have that. A lot of AP will get through you there too. But look at how big this step up is. It's protected by 25. So battleships overmatch through this. This is why I was saying it's so scary to be open water against Montanas, even like ships with not very high caliber for their tier. he overmatches through this. It's a very different scenario if we go over to, say, Martin, where we also get overmatched. The Monty would overmatch us upper belt here, but notice if he overmatches us there is no raised citadel portion for him to citadel. You know, his shells would plunge through, they would auto bounce off of this, ricochet up, he gets over pens, maybe some full pens because of the angle here, but he's not citadeling us. We can afford to angle to it and not eat citadels if we eat the shells in here. Whereas Irizar, if you eat the shells in here, which is pretty common, right? You're trying to avoid them hitting your bow because then they're going to citadel you through the bow section right here. But if they hit back here, they're still going to citadel you. There's this two bow on and stern on. It also affects the kited angles of this ship. That's actually how we got citadeled by that Togasa test ship, by the way. He penned through here. He doesn't overmatch 25, but he penned through here, and then the shells went through and citadeled us right there. That's a brutal weakness for a ship that wants to brawl, that wants to push up and get to close range against all these battleships that are going to be overmatching it. And even if you don't get overmatched, you still don't have a ton of HP. You can get burnt down pretty quickly. And yes, you got a super heal. Yes, you got smokes, but wow, is this a hard ship to play? Assuming we are getting into that brawling secondary range. If we play it more like a standard light cruiser, it's actually super chill, which is why that's my recommendation. Only use the secondaries when the opportunity arises. Don't force it, because 17.8 kilometers of range with usable shell velocity, 9.6 detect, that's a huge amount of distance. That's so comfortable. The difference between your range and your detection, I often think of as the comfort level of the ship. How often are you getting spotted versus how often are you able to shoot at ships when you are spotted? I think that is really, really comfy alongside the smoke generator. It's a solid light cruiser with a weird secondary gimmick that I would absolutely love to recommend because it is such a weird, different playstyle if it weren't for the cost. 40,000 doubloons. Too much, man. I do see that this ship is uncommon designation. So in the past, we have seen tier 10 uncommons like Sabir come back in 6 months, something like that. And they come back into the armory for just regular doubloons for 26,300. So it's possible. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it's possible, given past experiences with wargaming and this, that we will see Irizar come back in the armory for 26,300 doubloons in half a year, potentially. Again, that is pure speculation. I don't know that for sure, but based on what they have been doing with this classification, uncommon ships at this tier, that makes sense to me. I would recommend you hold off on that, because this is, again, it's a very expensive ship. There is some gambling crates for it, of course, as well. You know me, I am not for the gambling section. If, though, it happens to be in the very first tab, because at least you do get to see what you're opening. Sometimes I have people ask me this, is it worth it to get the premium ship for 1,800 doubloons in the first bundle? Yes. Just because I'm not a fan of it at 40,000 doubloons. It's a deal, bro, at 1,800. If you're willing to spend on the game, of course, because some people are strict free to play, and I respect that. But if you get it first, yes. What I'm talking about here on the channel is for most people, they're not going to get that lucky, and they would have to spend the 40,000 doubloons. Anyways, very long video because we have a very interesting gimmick on a very confused ship. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.